at it again! Because I keep finding random stuff as I go through my things, like trying to organize things, because I have a lot of gaming stuff that I forgot I had. But, you know, now that we're done with all the, you know, guides, maybe we should do something different. Something exciting. Something that's just weird and off-kilter. I'll never be able to work these into any other kind of video, so I might as well talk about them now, because some of these... Whew! So, I'm sure many of you are already well aware of what third-party hardware is. You know, you buy a console, but there's a bunch of other companies that are allowed to make hardware for that console. Sometimes it's like, you know, different auxiliary things, like, you know, steering wheels for controllers, or, you know, grips for controllers, or... It's usually controllers, which is actually going to be our main focus today. Because the thing about third-party stuff, if you don't know, if you've never had the displeasure of buying a questionable one, is that they're very hit or miss. Generally speaking, if you buy a first-party piece of hardware for a console, usually you don't have to worry about it breaking super easily. There are historical cases where that is not true, but for the most part, that's not really a problem. Although, the most recent example is actually really recent, which is the Switch's analog sticks, which we won't even talk about, because no. Anyway, so, for your viewing pleasure, we are going to first start out with this thing. Now, I don't even know where I got this. I just found it, and I'm like, where did this even come from? But on it says QuickShot, which I'm well aware is, or was, a maker of joysticks for home computers. Now this end, I thought, this is the same end that worked in both the Genesis and the Atari 2600. So I thought maybe this was a 2600 controller, and it might work in there. However, the reason I'm even showing this to you is because it has suction cups on it. And that tells me it was made for a desk, therefore for a home computer, which is fine, but I'm just like, would I ever want it to be suctioned to the desk? I don't know. So yeah, the joystick itself feels okay. There's not too much travel on it. Don't know whether it still works, but, you know, hey. So, yeah, that's a thing. That's not super interesting. However, this is my personal Sega Genesis controller, which I have used for over 20 years. This is... I don't believe it is a first-party controller, which is amazing, because this thing has lasted me all this time. I started out with a regular Genesis controller, but when that one finally failed, I got this. And first of all, it's a 6-button controller, which later Genesis has added the extra buttons, which, like, no games took advantage of. I think the only one that I ever owned that took advantage of it was Primal Rage, which just let you, like, add special attacks to these extra buttons, which made the whole game really, really cheap because you just spam special attacks the whole time. Anyway, but it's a turbo controller, so you could probably tell. And you know, this is a really nice, solid controller. The buttons all have never failed me. D-pad's pretty much the same as a regular Genesis controller. You know, this was a good buy. I really like this controller. And it still works to this day, so, you know, I'm showing you this because I want to make it clear that not all third-party, you know, hardware is necessarily bad, because, you know, I have things that have worked. So, you know, it's not something you have to necessarily immediately assume with third parties. However, there are other examples of things that have gone awry when it comes to third-party software and hardware. We'll continue on with this, which is not a third-party Dreamcast controller. It is a regular Dreamcast controller, which I'm only showing you for comparison purposes to this thing. This is a high-frequency, which I believe this is the same brand as this thing. Great controller. This one, however, so here's the thing. Alright, this started out as actually a really good controller. It's got a nice leatherized analog stick that I really like, over the typical plasticky, just dots for the grip that this can kind of wear on your thumb. So this has nice rubberized version. D-pad is alright, but most games don't even use that. Buttons are all good. There's actually like a little bit of like almost a grain on them for improved gripping. Triggers are fine, and it's more ergonomic, so it actually fits in your hand better. This was a good controller for a while, until it stopped working. Well, I shouldn't say it stopped working completely, so here's what it does. It does two things that are great. The first thing it does is it will not turn on at all when I turn the console on. I have to unplug it and plug it back in when with the console on, and then it'll work. Which is confusing for a whole host of reasons. But even if that wasn't, you know, super annoying, and it is, but even if it wasn't, the bigger issue that I have with this is that, see this Y button? Yeah, that doesn't work anymore. Like, pretty much at all. Like, occasionally I might, like, it might work, but, yeah, this is a... This one really frustrates me because, like, I would love this if it was functional, but it failed on me, and I didn't even get to use it that much before it started having problems, so, yeah, that's wonderful. Off you go. Moving on, let's talk about PlayStation third-party controllers. There's a whole plethora of these. I have only 2 to show you, but there's one in particular that I really must insist that you see, because you are never, ever gonna believe it. Here is a regular PlayStation controller for you. Well, actually, this is a DualShock 2, but it is identical to a DualShock 1, which both these controllers happen to emulate, just for the original PlayStation. I shouldn't say identical. It's not identical. The difference mainly is in the buttons. DualShock 2 has pressurized buttons, so you can press it, but some games take advantage of, like Metal Gear Solid 2, if you press like the fire button, you can hold people up, and then release it slowly, so you don't fire, which helps getting the all the dog tags. Have you ever done that? If you try to play that game with a regular PlayStation controller, you'll just shoot them immediately if you press this, so that's the main difference. Anyway, fun fact of the day. So, we'll leave it over there. This first one is not mine. I don't know where it came from. I believe that my sister, when she was gaming in her youth, may have bought this, and since she no longer plays games, I have suddenly come into possession of it. But it is a Mad Catz controller, and that is a brand I'm sure many of you are familiar with because they made a plethora of third-party hardware for all sorts of different consoles. Dual Force. I've never actually used this myself, though admittedly it feels pretty good in the hand, but it kind of has that same problem that Mad Catz tends to have, which is they use really cheap materials to make their stuff. This plastic looks kind of cool by sight, but you feel it and it's like, oh no. So I don't know how long this would have lasted, but the buttons feel pretty much the same. This D-pad is hideous, though. It's one of those, like, springy... You know what it is? It's an Xbox 360 D-pad. That's what this is, so that's not good. But everything else seems okay. The wire's all sparkly and coated, and I don't get it. Analog sticks feel alright, too, I guess. There's a start button in the middle, and there's a mode button. I don't even know what that's for. Or if it's relevant to anything. Maybe this controller had some extra features. I never used it myself, like I said. I just found it, and I thought it looked kind of neat. You know, it just gives you an example of the kind of stuff you might be finding back in the 90s. But the one I really absolutely have got to show you was mine. It is... I'm gonna give you a second. Here, have a size comp. You know, it's great. I've had this thing for over 20 years now, and I don't think I've ever really accepted that this is a thing that physically actually exists. For the purposes of this discussion, I am going to ignore the obvious problem that literally all of you have noticed by now. So, it has an auto fire, which never really worked, to my recollection. Also, now it's stuck. That's great. The buttons have are like taller, but they press down very quickly, so that's never really an issue. The D-pad is kind of gross, but it works. Shoulder buttons are fine. They call it tremor because it's got rumble. apparently, like, if I remember, it said it had, like, extra rumble. So I guess it shook harder. But, that's not really what we want to talk about, is it? Who thought? I want to know which controller designer sat down and said, I would like to have all these gamers rub their thumbs on a pair of balls. Look, dirty jokes aside, this is a horrific design for an analog stick. These are impossible to use. They are literally these. They are pretty much the exact same, except there's no stick. It's just, they're just balls. This thing was impossible. I could not use it to play anything with analog. Now, to be fair, it was functional for the most part otherwise when it came to games that didn't need analog sticks. So basically, out of all the games I owned, I could play everything that wasn't called Ape Escape, which was annoying. I love that game. And it does have a nice aerodynamic design again. Like, you know, it's good. It feels pretty good in the hand. It feels a little cheap, but, you know, it works okay otherwise. But without analog sticks, it's like, what's the point, guys? Why would you even consider this idea? Also, something else that happened, you may have noticed the X button has worn off, which is great. But a bigger issue, you may not be able to see that. That's the X button. It sticks if you turn it. And you're saying, well, why would you turn it? You don't understand, and you probably have never noticed this yourself. When you press buttons, especially in the heat of gameplay, your thumb might shift somehow. You know, you may not even notice it. This thing stuck on me so often during gameplay. It was such a pain in the butt. And it wore off because the paint's cheap, and well, I was pressing the X button a lot. I was probably playing a lot of platformers, and that's usually the jump button unless your name's Tomb Raider. So, yeah, this thing's awful. It's just terrible. So yeah, if you're asking my personal opinion, generally speaking, it's probably better to stick to first-party stuff. I get why third parties exist, mostly because generally these controllers are cheaper. But you get what you pay for, usually. So just bear that in mind, buyer beware. And with that, till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.